Today we're looking at one of the most important skills in writing: show, don't tell. You might have heard this phrase before, it's everywhere in writing advice, but today we're going to actually break it down properly and make it usable. By the end of this session, you'll be able to take very simple, flat sentences and turn them into something vivid and engaging. This is the difference between writing that feels a bit dull and writing that really pulls a reader in. So at its simplest, telling is when you explain something to the reader. Showing is when you let them experience it. Telling would be something like, he was scared. Showing is where you demonstrate that fear through what the character does, how they react, what they notice. The key idea is this: instead of just stating what's happening, you make the reader feel it for themselves, and that's what makes writing come alive. Can anyone think of a book or film where you really felt what a character was going through? Here are 3 classic examples. Example 1. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. When George shoots Lenny at the end, we're not told George was heartbroken. Instead we see his hesitation, the way he keeps talking about the dream, the quiet setting. You can feel George's pain through what he does, not because the author tells us directly. Example 2. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. When Jane leaves Rochester, we feel her inner conflict through her thoughts, the harsh environment, her physical exhaustion. We're not just told she's upset, we experience her struggle through her journey. Example 3. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. When Pip first visits Miss Havisham, the setting does the work: the stopped clocks, the decaying wedding feast, the eerie atmosphere. The room shows us something is wrong. We feel it before it's ever explained. Notice how in all of these, we're not just told how the character feels, we experience it with them. Let's look at another really clear and simple example. She was nervous. That's telling. It gives us the information, but it doesn't give us much else. Now look at the second version. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door, her breath catching in her throat. We're not told she's nervous, but we can see it and feel it. That's the goal. You want your reader to work it out without being directly told. Good writing often trusts the reader to join the dots. So why does show don't tell matter so much? Because showing makes your writing more engaging, helps readers feel emotions, creates stronger imagery, and makes everything feel more real. If you only tell, your writing can feel a bit distant, like a summary. But when you show, it feels like the reader is inside the moment. They're not just reading the story, they're experiencing it. One of the easiest ways to show instead of tell is through actions. Instead of saying, he was angry, you show it. What does anger look like? Does he slam something? Clench his jaw? Avoid speaking? Actions are powerful because they're visual. We can picture them instantly. When in doubt, ask yourself, what would this emotion look like in real life? This brings us to something really important: subtext. We have covered this in previous sessions, but a quick summary is, subtext is what's going on underneath the words. In real life, people don't always say exactly how they feel. They show it through body language, facial expressions, silence, the way they move, and great writing does the same. You're not always writing what the character says. You're showing what they mean. Here's a simple example. She didn't like him. Very direct, very flat. Now, she avoided his eyes and stepped back whenever he came closer. We're not told anything directly, but it's obvious how she feels. This is much more interesting for the reader, because they're actively interpreting what's happening. Showing doesn't just come from characters, it can come from the setting as well. Think about films for a second. When something sad happens, what do we often see? Rain, darkness, empty spaces. When something happy happens, sunlight, color, movement, noise. That's not an accident. The environment is being used to reflect emotion. Writing works in exactly the same way. Instead of saying, it was a sad day, you might describe rain tapping against the windows, gray clouds covering the sky, everything feeling quiet and still. You haven't said the word sad, but the reader feels it. The setting becomes almost like another character. It helps tell the story. Here's a classic example from Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. When Pip first visits Miss Havisham's house, the setting is described as dark, dusty clock stopped in time, a rotting wedding feast left untouched. Dickens never just says, this place is strange and unsettling. Instead, the environment shows it. Before we're told anything about Miss Havisham, we already feel that something is wrong, just from the setting. The room tells us everything. Now, this is really important, and it's something a lot of new writers get wrong. Not everything needs to be shown. When people first learn, show, don't tell, they often think, I need to describe absolutely everything in detail. But if you do that, your writing actually becomes slow, heavy, and sometimes even a bit exhausting to read. Imagine describing every single movement, every look, every step. It would take forever to get through even a simple scene, so this is where balance comes in. Good writing uses both showing and telling, just at different times. When to show big emotional moments, important scenes, key character interactions, moments you want the reader to feel. This is where you slow things down and let the reader experience it properly. When to tell background information, time passing, simple actions that aren't important, moving from one scene to another. This keeps your story flowing and avoids unnecessary detail. Here's a simple example. You wouldn't write, he walked down the street, his left foot moved forward, then his right, his arms swinging slightly. That's overshowing something unimportant. Instead, you'd simply write, he walked down the street, and save your detail for when something matters. Think of showing like a spotlight. You don't shine it on everything. You use it to highlight the moments that matter most. Everything else stays in the background. If everything is detailed, nothing feels important. But when you choose your moments carefully, those scenes stand out. And that's what makes writing powerful. Now let's look at some really common mistakes people make when they're trying to show, don't tell. And honestly, everyone does these at the start, so don't worry if this feels familiar. Over-explaining, spelling everything out. This is probably the biggest one. Writers sometimes feel like they need to explain everything so the reader understands. So instead of just showing a moment, they'll explain it as well. For example, he slammed the door because he was really angry and frustrated. You don't need the explanation at the end. If he's slamming the door, we already understand he's angry. When you explain too much, it actually weakens the writing, because you're not trusting the reader to figure it out. Too many adjectives, trying too hard to describe. This is when writing becomes overloaded with description. For example, the very dark, cold, creepy, silent, eerie room. It starts to feel a bit forced, and actually less effective. Strong writing usually uses specific, carefully chosen details, not lots of extra words. 1 or 2 powerful images will always beat a long list of adjectives. Repeating emotions, saying the same thing in different ways. This happens when writers don't quite trust that they've made the emotion clear, so they repeat it. For example, she was nervous. Her hands were shaking. She felt anxious and uneasy. All of that is saying the same thing. Instead, choose one strong image or action, and let it do the work. The real skill, knowing when to step back. One of the biggest skills in writing isn't adding more. It's knowing when to stop, when to leave space, when to let the reader fill in the gaps. Because that's where the magic happens. Trust your reader. Your reader doesn't need everything explained. They can pick up on clues, understand emotions, read between the lines. In fact, readers actually enjoy doing that. It makes the story more engaging. So trust them. They're smarter than you think. If you ever feel like you're over-explaining, you probably are. And that's your sign to take a step back and let the writing breathe. Now we'll put this into practice. I want you to write a short scene around 300 to 500 words. You can choose one of these. Waiting for important news. Walking alone at night. First day somewhere new. The key focus. Don't tell me how the character feels. Show it through actions, setting, and detail. Take your time. This is where the learning really happens. Let's quickly recap what we've covered today. First, show emotions through actions. Instead of telling us how a character feels, let us see it in what they do. Their body language, their reactions, the small details. Second, let your setting reflect mood. The environment around your character can do a lot of the work for you. Weather, surroundings, atmosphere. All of these can help create emotion without you needing to explain it. And third, avoid over-explaining. You don't need to spell everything out. In fact, your writing becomes much stronger when you leave a little space for the reader to interpret things themselves. Now, if you remember just one thing from today, let it be this. Don't just tell the reader what's happening, make them feel it. Because that's the real difference between writing that's simply understood and writing that's remembered. Final thought. This is actually one of my favorite quotes about writing, because it explains everything we've talked about today in just one sentence. Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass. By Anton Chekhov. Anton Chekhov was a Russian writer from the late 1800s. He's considered one of the greatest writers of all time. He was especially known for short stories, very simple on the surface, but full of meaning underneath. What made his writing special was how subtle it was. He didn't over-explain things. He trusted the reader to pick up on emotions through small details, actions, and atmosphere. In other words, he was doing, show, don't tell, long before it became writing advice. These are all still studied and performed today, which shows just how powerful his writing was. And a big part of that is exactly what we've talked about today. He didn't tell you everything, he made you feel it. What I love about this is how specific it is. It doesn't just say, the moon is shining, which is quite general and a bit flat. Instead, it gives you a very clear, visual image. Light catching on broken glass. You can see it, you can almost feel it. And that's the difference. It's about being specific, visual, and slightly indirect. You're not explaining the moment, you're creating it. You're giving the reader something they can picture in their mind, and that's really what great writing does. It doesn't just give information, it creates an experience. So whenever you're writing, try to think, how can I show this instead of just saying it? Because those small changes, those little details, are what turn ordinary writing into something powerful. Next week, we're moving on to writing with style and tone, and this is where your writing really starts to sound like you. We'll be looking at things like word choice, rhythm, and sentence variation. How even small changes in the way you write a sentence can completely change how it feels to the reader. We'll also explore tone, whether your writing feels humorous, serious, suspenseful, or more poetic, and how you create that through your language. And finally, we'll start looking at how to develop your own personal style, not copying anyone else, but finding what feels natural and effective for you as a writer. This is where everything we've learned so far really starts to come together. See you all next week.